From the library of the New York Stock Exchange, at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution for global growth for more than 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now, at the NYSE and at ICE's 12 exchanges and 7 clearinghouses around the world. Now here's your host, Josh King, Head of Communications at Intercontinental Exchange.
Welcome inside the Ice House. Today we're bringing you another conversation from Interbrand's Best Global Brands Summit. Every year, Interbrand, a division of Omnicom Group, NYSE ticker symbol OMC, identifies the top 100 brands creating value for their companies and shareholders. The keynote of the event was a fireside chat with the New York Stock Exchange's Executive Vice Chairman Betty Liu and Forbes Media's Chief Content Officer Randall Lane on how the archetype of the entrepreneur has changed due to technology, access to capital, and the American spirit. Betty and Randall discuss how modern brands make and keep consumers' trust while standing out in the crowded landscape of traditional and social media. The conversation kicks off with Forbes Media's recently announced partnership to leverage blockchain technology to combat fake news and revolutionize journalism. I'll turn the episode over to Andrew Miller now, Senior Strategy Director at Interbrand, to introduce Betty and Randall right after this.
Our mission is to bring the world together through live experiences. We're focused on building a technology enablement platform for event creators, lower the friction and cost of creating an event, and increase the rate of success for event creators all over the world. We're a global inclusive company in 11 different countries. This really marks a new chapter for Eventbrite, and it feels like the starting line. Eventbrite now listed on the New York Stock Exchange.
We're going to bring Betty back on stage today to lead a conversation with none other than Randall Lane. He's an editor of Forbes magazine and the chief content officer there as well. He's been with the company for 12 years. In addition to his role as an editor, he also writes about business, philanthropy, and food. And just in this last year, he's interviewed Jeff Flake, Donald Trump, Emmanuel Macron, and Jeff Bezos, to name a few. It's quite a year so far for Randall. They're going to be talking about how capitalism is fueling a brave new world. So please welcome Betty and Randall to the stage.
Well, I want to ask first about this interesting piece of news that I saw today about Forbes, kind of breaking some new ground here, or at least being at the forefront, blockchain. Mm-hmm. So Forbes partnering with a company called Civil to publish on the blockchain.
We've been talking about brands all day. I think it's consistent with what Forbes has always, at least for the last, we got Mike Federle, our CEO, back here, and since Fed and the new management team came in 7-8 years ago, with the contributor network, the brand voice platform, it's always been trying to do new things and do new things first and pioneer. And so this is an idea. We think that blockchain is here to stay. Now, whether or not you should be buying Bitcoin, I have different opinions on that. But blockchain, we believe strongly, is here to stay. And so with that in mind, why shouldn't we be the first major publishing company to try to experiment and actually publish on the blockchain, which in the beginning, it doesn't mean that much. What it means is it's basically a verification system where our metadata is going to be shared via Civil, and you're basically going to know it's real news, it's a real Forbes story. It could lead to all sorts of things, but I don't want to get too aggressive. We're going to sit and we're going to learn and we're going to experiment, but we're taking that first little foot forward. It could lead to all sorts of things as blockchain develops.
Like what? Like, give me an example, for instance.
It could, if you project out, if this all works, people could publish, use our CMS, publish, a contributor could publish their story on the Forbes platform, and then, let's say 5 days later, because Forbes, with our contributors, we always, they always publish first in Forbes, they want to publish it on their own blog. It could automatically upload, and again, you would know, everyone would know it's the legitimate story. It could serve as basically a verification and a certification and an automatic syndication. But again, that's 5 steps forward. Right now, all we're doing is dipping our toe in the water.
Could it be like sort of what social media is now on steroids, essentially?
Listen, I think at the end of the day, blockchain is, if you look at what are the technological trends that are for real, it's blockchain and it's AI. Those are not going anywhere. Those are, you have to play. And so we're playing in both those areas. Our CMS also has an AI component. It will, when our contributors or our staffers write a headline for a story, we have AI prompts to try to help them write better headlines. And so again, we don't have computers writing stories yet, but we are experimenting and dipping our toe in so that we learn. Because who knows, I could not tell you where this is gonna go. I just know that we're gonna learn, and wherever it goes, we wanna be one of the first with the knowledge to do that.
Right, learn, evaluate, and then adjust, right?
That's the key to capitalism. Here we are.
Here we are.
The Versailles of capitalism.
And when you think about all these technologies, right, whether it's blockchain or it's AI, or any number of ones that we've talked about, how does that, Randall, in your view, changing the way brands communicate to the, quote unquote, end user?
In terms of using the technology, I think at the end of the day,
and also receiving that content too.
Again, these are evolving. I think it comes down to brands need to show that they're evolving. I mean, it's almost as important that we're trying it as to what we learn, because we're also sending a message about our brand that we are open to innovation, that we are learning, and we're comfortable failing too. And I think as much as how do you use AI to disseminate information, receive information, blockchain, again, still very in the early days of both these things. But right now, for everybody here, and we have some of the best CMOs in the world here, it's also a message to the market, a message to the world that you're at a brand and we're at a brand that is comfortable with change, is not intimidated by it, and is going to figure it out one way or another, as opposed to get steamrollered like we see too many, in media. I mean, you've got a lot of bodies in the all over the place on both sides of the road. But if you accept as part of your culture that you're comfortable with change, you're comfortable with innovation. That's what we've done at Forbes, is we've embraced change. And the thing we're really afraid of is not trying things, because that's when you really have to start looking over your shoulder.
So that's interesting, because the whole theme here is activating brave, right? So do you think that nowadays brands get more credit for activating brave than it was in years past, right?
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's also, you don't want to. I think there's a caveat, which is authenticity, in that if you activate brave just to show that you're brave, the customers now in every field, certainly in our field, they're smart, and they can tell when you're forcing it and so you want to activate brave and you get credit, but you get credit if it's within the realm of what you're supposed to do. And so I think that the caveat is, yes, the brands that we cover, and again, all we're doing is looking at companies that are innovating and companies that are at the cutting edge, but it's the ones who are innovating authentically that get the credit, whether or not it works. Of course, the goal is that it works, and then you get the benefits of that. But even in failure, you learn, but the key is that it's authenticity, and you're not jumping into something that you have no business being.
The one thing we know is consumers are very savvy these days.
Yes.
They can sniff out
100%.
Fake
100%.
things, fake news. Speaking about fake news, Donald Trump. So you interviewed him.
Yes.
Jeff Bezos, Emmanuel Macron, as Andrew had mentioned.
Yes.
Many luminaries in the last few years. Just within the last year, speaking to many of these newsmakers, what have you learned?
That we're in very, you can look at it two ways. We're in crazy times, and you can look at it, we're in scary times, but we're also in incredibly exciting times. And you talk to, you could take a Trump and a Bezos, and I was talking to Charles, about this, a week or two ago. I mean, you've got these two billionaires, one is the richest man in the world, the other thinks he's the richest man in the world. And one is president, the other thinks he maybe should be president. But what you see, is they kind of represent these two sides of the coin, where you've one, Bezos, besides the fact that he's looking really, he's spending a lot of, he has time, clearly the bigger the company gets, the more he can delegate because he's been working out a lot. But here's somebody who is rigorously looking at data, and he's not afraid to take chances and take risks, and it's been paying off in ways we've never seen. I mean, our Forbes 400 came out last week, and for the first time in 24 years, Bill Gates is not the richest person in America or the world. It's Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos made almost as much money in the last 12 months. He made basically a Warren Buffett. And just in additional gains, he's now worth 160 billion. We never had anybody worth 100 billion, and he just blew past that. So he is absolutely crushing it and crushing a lot of companies along with it, because that's somebody who's focused on data and logic. And then you have this other guy who, there's no data, it's all gut. Facts really aren't, there's no fact set. It's just gut and marketing. And so they're both polar opposites, but they also represent kind of what's going on, which is it's the best, it's scary times, but it's also incredibly exciting times. And we cover, and what we try to focus on, we focus on both, but I think there's a reason that there's so much there's a disturbance in the force out there right now, despite the fact that we're growing 3-4%. I mean, this is good times. The economy is humming. That's the riddle. That's
so interesting you point that out, though, putting them side by side. I mean, does it tell you that they're two Americas? Is there no better metaphor than that, perhaps?
The issue is, what we're going through this disruption is that people, even though we have full employment, again, we have full employment and people are scared. And it's because we're going through this historic change along the lines of the Industrial Revolution. And there's incredible opportunity. I mean, look where we are. We're here in the New York Stock Exchange. And, we just, last week also we came out our Under 30 Summit, which is, we gather all the honorees from our 30 Under 30 list from around the world. And we had over 9,000 people come to Boston, the best young leaders and young entrepreneurs in the world. It's an amazing event. And you look at that 30 Under 30, and you see people like, they're all listed here. You've got Evan Spiegel, big board listed company, Snapchat. He founded that when he was in college. He was a billionaire by the time he was 23 years old. You have Daniel Ek at Spotify, another 30 Under 30 member, listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Founded that when he was in his early mid-20s. Aaron Levy at Box founded that in his 20s. That's also listed here in the New York Stock Exchange. So here at the place that you used to have, you have to be, to actually start a company and take it public on the big board, even 20 years ago, you needed to be like an 80-year-old man, right? I mean, you did not have kids ringing the bell wearing hoodies. And now, it's commonplace. Somebody bats an eye because that's the incredible world we're in. We're in an incredible world. If you think about it, and if you look at where we live, and if you take the whole arc of human history, until 10, 15 years ago, you weren't able to take a company public at a multi-billion-dollar valuation. It wasn't that there were laws against it. It was just that you needed time and you needed resources, and nobody would give you money unless you had an adult with you. It just didn't happen. Maybe occasionally, maybe 20, 30 years ago, that Michael Dell and Bill Gates were like the pioneers, but even then, it was such an aberration. And now it's commonplace. Now it's easier for a 25-year-old to raise money than a 55-year-old. If your computer is broken, and IT comes, and a 25-year-old walks in and a 55-year-old, you want the 25-year-old to fix it. It's serious. And that's the first time, so we've inverted it where for the first time in human history, it's actually, the digital natives, it's actually an advantage to be young and have these ideas. So we're in this world where you could take an idea and some code, and you could be ringing the bell 3 years later here with a multi-billion-dollar valuation. So that's exciting, but also for people who've kind of played the game over 30 years and know you cannot count on being an employee somewhere, and that you're set and you're gonna get the gold watch in 40 years, that's scary.
It's commonplace now, but is it normal in your view?
Well, it's different because of technology and because of the digital, it's part of all our lives now, and because the people who grew up with these phones, they're wired differently. They could see things that, we are maybe a few years older than them, but we just can't see it because it's innate to them. And so I don't think that's going away. And just because it's like, okay, well now everybody in every generation is going to have that, it's normal, because no, the next generation, it's going to be innate that they work in AR and VR and they grew up with that. So because of technology and people growing up, you've had a paradigm shift where I don't think that changes. This isn't going to change. This isn't like, okay, like after the next crash, the kids get back to school and the adults get to run again. It's not going to happen. The 30 under 30 works for a reason.
This is here to stay.
This is absolutely here to stay.
To your point, I mean, it seems like, one minute, you hear about a $1 billion company, the next month they're a $2 billion company.
Right.
I mean, that growth is just accelerating.
And they're also holding out later to go public, where before the going public was the end line. And I mean, some it's the starting line too, but now it's like, they want to sometimes wait as long as they can to raise $10 billion from SoftBank. And
those are good problems to have, right?
Big time.
You spearheaded the Forbes 30 under 30, which you had referenced. And I'm curious, we've kind of touched a little bit upon it, but the biggest differences you see between entrepreneurs now and before?
It's it's like skiing. The best time to learn how to ski is when you're 4 years old, because when you fall, it doesn't hurt. And the reason you're having all these absolutely wild ideas and is because the best time to start a company, aside from all the psychographic reasons to do it, and the reasons that we've seen that change in the last 10 years, the advantage swing towards younger, is because, you don't have a mortgage or kids or anything like that. And so it's that mindset. If you go to Harvard Business School now, you go to Stanford, or you go, Columbia, anywhere, and you say, who do you want to be? They don't say, 20, 30 years ago, they said, oh, I want to be Lloyd Blankfein, or they want to be Mark Zuckerberg. They do not want to climb corporate ladders. There is this idea, and that's why Forbes is working right now. Because Forbes has always been about the entrepreneur. We've been blessed with this great brand that for 101 years, since Forbes' founding, Forbes wrote about people. Fortune always would focus on corporations. And there were times, let's say in the 1950s and 1980s, where the corporation was exciting. But we're in an era where it's the people that are exciting. And what you see psychographically with the 30 under 30, but really with any, if you just hashtag 30 under 30, and every day you'll see kids in college say, I'm going to make the 30 under 30 by the time I'm 29. That's going to be my first goal, because I want to have self-destiny. So there is a culture shift where being an entrepreneur, there was a time even 20 years ago, I remember at my first stint at Forbes writing a story about all the layoffs going on in Research Triangle, and a lot of these kind of mid-career tech executives said, well, no one's giving me a job right now, so I guess I have to start my own company. It was kind of like, I have to jump, I have no choice. But now, ask your kids and your kids' friends and your brothers and your sisters, or whoever you got in your world that's 22 years old or 18 years old or 25 years old. So they want to start their own company. They don't aspire to work. Maybe they want to aspire to work at a Facebook or an exciting young company so they can learn.
Start their own
can start their own, but they're not saying, I want to work at Facebook and be there for 40 years. They do not. They do not. And that is a change. And that, again, I don't think that's going away either, which is great for Forbes, of course, because we love entrepreneurs and celebrate entrepreneurship. And I think people it ties into what we're talking about with the uncertainty. The only thing that's certain is that you have to rely on yourself. And entrepreneurship is the safest way. In some ways, it's the safest career path, because you don't have to wait and look over your shoulder, how's the company doing? Are they going to need to cut back? Did it get merged? Did it get cut? You have self-destiny, and I think that's very attractive, especially in choppy times.
You see that changing where, people who are at companies suddenly say, why am I here?
For sure.
I want to get what intel I can at my company, and then I want to go start 100%. My own.
But it also is a factor, and let's hear from America right now, that we're in the only, and this is where we should feel optimistic. We should feel good. We're maybe the only country in the world where failure is a good thing. The easiest way to raise $10 million in Silicon Valley is to have lost your last $10 million. That's true. That's funny, and it's true. There is an acceptance that the only way to succeed is to fail and to learn. The only way you're failing is if you're not learning. But that's not true. If you lose, we did a big cover story on President Macron. And getting to talk to him was very interesting, because you're in bizarro world where the guy who's hitting the most free market notes in the world is the president of France. That's when, Trump is putting up tariffs. Wow, we are in strange times here. But that said, the problem with France, and it's not his fault, he inherited a culture where if you go and raise $10 million and you lose it, you're kind of dead. You're not going to get, they don't forgive that. They're like, oh, you are a failure. And that's hundreds of years of culture, where America, especially over the last 20, 30 years, accepts, in some ways celebrates failure, because there's an understanding that it takes failure to get to success. And that's why...
Well, that signals risk-taking.
Signals risk-taking, but it also signals that you're not going to hit it right every time out of the gate. It's almost impossible. And there's an acceptance that if you're learning, the safest thing to do, again, if you give somebody who's lost, they're not going to make the same mistakes. They'll probably make new mistakes. But that's fairly unique to America. And it's why, no matter how down, and like last week was, just politically a rough week, no matter what side you're on, it was a taut week here in the States. And we had Jeff Flake at the Under 30 Summit, and we had 5,000 people watching that interview, and then there were 1,000 people protesting before the interview.
Yeah.
And it was exciting, and it was dynamic, and it was democracy in some ways at its finest. But so it's strange. It's disrupted times here, but there is, we have to also take a step and recognize that this country still has so many amazing advantages, and one of those is that acceptance of risk and that celebration of entrepreneurship.
Which again, we both have experienced, but to success, not failure.
I failed. It's fine. I've started 2 companies, and they both didn't make it to the finish line. But a lot of what we've been able to accomplish here on Forbes is a very entrepreneurial place, is because I took those lessons. And again, you just keep on learning, and that's great.
So Randall, in the last few moments that we have you on stage here, I do want to talk a little bit about the media. It's a question I often get, and I want to pose it to you, which is, consumers right now, the audience, so to speak, they get information everywhere now, right? On social media.
Right.
They of course go to Forbes to get trustworthy, credible information. So what can you tell the audience here on educating the audience on misinformation out there?
It's it's a great question, and it's the number one, most important thing going on right now. Media is, how do you trust? I mean, we're in a situation where you look at every poll, and people have incredible mistrust in any information they get, no matter where they get it. And some of that is the fact that anybody can create content now. I mean, you could just go on your Facebook page and write something. You can post something on LinkedIn. You can post something on Medium. So, the beautiful thing about what's happened is we've democratized information that is mostly good. But in democratizing information, we've kind of created this Tower of Babel where nobody trusts kind of anything. But that's where it's been a lot of fun to be at Forbes, because you do see, and again, we have so many brand experts here, you see that turn to quality brands as kind of, in some ways, it gives us more power, because if people are looking for stuff, and they just did the Neiman Labs up at Harvard just did an incredible survey. They interviewed over 2,000 people, so it's a bulletproof sort of the margin error survey about what brands they trust most. And Forbes out of 38 came in 5th, and we were right ahead, one spot ahead of NBC News, and 2 spots ahead of New York Times, and 1 below BBC. So we were in excellent company, and we were very proud of that. And I think that's our number one challenge and our number one goal, is to cherish that we have a great brand. And again, we have all these brand stewards in this room. You represent an unbelievable brand. So everything we think about every day when we go into work, when we publish a story, we publish 300 or 400 stories a day, is we recognize that any one story, ask Rolling Stone and the UVA rape story. Any one story can kill your brand. So it is both an honor and a privilege to have a brand that has that kind of trust. And in this world, people are increasingly looking to a few brands to say, okay, I know that is legitimate. We still have fact checking. We're one of the only places that still do that. And again, is that
trust fragile? quite fragile.
Yes, and that's an investment we make in that trust, because it's not you cannot economically justify having 20 people who a lot of their job is to sit around checking name spellings and things like that.
Right.
But it's an investment in the brand. And that's our number one asset, is our brand. And everything we do every day is to, so that's, at the end of the day, it is very, every institution is under attack. Financial markets, government, media. There's a mistrust. In this world, there's a mistrust of everything institutional. And so, but you do see, and we saw that, on Friday with the release of the survey, you do see people saying, you know what, when I can't trust anything, I'm going to take a couple things that they're beacons that I know I can trust, and that's something that we think about every day.
And Randall, just a final thought here. What are some tips or what recommendations might you give the audience here about how to cut through the noise? As a brand, how do you cut through the noise these days?
I cut through the noise in the way that's probably the worst way to cut through noise. I actually use Twitter, which is the worst, actually, in some ways, place. But if you filter correctly, and you filter, most important, you filter small l liberally, in that you're getting different points of view, trusted sources, but diverse sources, you can actually get a feed. If more people did that and use filters, but in a way not to reinforce what they think they know, versus to get a wide spectrum of interesting facts and opinion from places they trust, I think we could return. I mean, that's what's missing in this country is, there's no Walter Cronkite trusted voice anymore. Right. Again, he probably had too much power in retrospect, but you can now amalgamate that if you're smart. We need to educate. It comes down to education. We need to educate kids who are growing up incredibly jaded about information. They're the worst. They don't trust anything. And when, that's why in some ways the 30 under 30 is important, because we quickly get them in our camp.
Right, but how about the brands? How did the brands cut through the noise?
Well, how do the brands cut through the noise? That is a good question. It goes, to me, it goes back to, and when we cover these companies, and when we just did the big cover story on Amazon, it's authenticity and it's trust, in that they take responsibility and they speak that people trust them. The brand, just like when we publish, if we ever publish a story that is wrong, we don't correct it, it's a brand killer. No matter what your company is or what your business is, we all make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. How do you handle those mistakes? Are you authentic and honest? Because, like you said before, Betty, the consumers have gotten so savvy that if you try to end run them, they will figure it out. And so it's kind of radical honesty, which is kind of refreshing.
Pretty simple, right? Getting back to the basics.
It's simple in theory, and it's hard
and hard to execute. Right, Randall, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thanks to the New York Stock Exchange's Executive Vice Chairman Betty Liu for hosting this episode of Inside the Ice House with Randall at the Interbrand Best Global Brands Summit. And that's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Forbes Media's Chief Content Officer, Randall Lane. If you liked what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show, email us at icehouse@theice.com or tweet at us at NYSE. Our show is produced by Pete Ash and Ian Wolfe, with production assistance from Ken Abel and Stephen Portner. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of this information, and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security or recommendation of any security or trading practice.